Welcome to ILTV on the hour. We're live here in Israel, bringing you the biggest headlines from the region. It's currently 2 p.m. here and 7 a.m. in New York. I'm Shosh Bedrosian, and today is day 695 of the war in Gaza. Let's get into all the top headlines at this hour. The Israeli Security Cabinet is meeting today to receive a full briefing on military plans to capture Gaza City. And despite reported pressure from top security chiefs, the cabinet is not expected to discuss the latest hostage deal Hamas accepted. Now, the meeting will be held in a secure location after Israel targeted and killed top Hamas and Houthi leaders over the last few days. Meanwhile, the IDF has officially declared Gaza City a full-scale war zone. This means the humanitarian and tactical pauses that were in place for the last month will no longer be applied to Gaza City, and it is now declared, quote, a dangerous combat zone. That's according to the military. The army has ended all localized ceasefires, like we said, in Gaza City, although ceasefires remain in effect in Al-Mawasi and other parts of central and southern Gaza to allow for the continued flow of humanitarian aid to come in. Israel has been increasing aid deliveries to curb food insecurity in specific parts of the enclave, but that policy no longer applies to Gaza City. Now, despite repeated calls by the IDF for civilians to evacuate the north, only about 10,000 of the city's estimated 1 million residents have fled, far fewer than what was anticipated. And over the weekend, the IDF escalated its ground campaign, targeting dozens of Hamas locations across the Gaza Strip. In the south, Israeli troops engaged and eliminated Hamas gunmen. Specifically in Khan Yunis, the army is now asserting control over a key corridor linking the eastern and western parts of the city. And in other major developments in Gaza, the IDF has confirmed that a strike in Gaza City targeted a senior Hamas operative yesterday, with reports saying the strike actually killed Abu Obeda, the notorious Hamas spokesperson who has never actually revealed his face publicly. Now, the senior operative is seen with his face usually completely wrapped in a scarf in all of the videos released, and has, of course, been seen globally as he gives statements to the media. That's him under screen right now. The IDF has not confirmed yet if the strike was successful, although they remain optimistic. Meanwhile, the military did confirm they struck and killed Mahmoud al-Aswad, a senior Hamas security leader, just last week. The military says he operated as the general security leader for Western Gaza, and they described him as a significant source of knowledge for Hamas. And in a rare announcement, the IDF says it also killed Abu Zubaydah, described as the most senior ISIS figure in Gaza, who was responsible for operations across Gaza, Judea and Samaria, and Sinai. That's him on your screen right now, that image released by the IDF. And the bodies of 2 Israeli hostages were recovered in a special operation by the IDF in Shin Bet inside of Gaza, bringing now the total number of hostages in captivity in the enclave to 48. It comes as Prime Minister Netanyahu shares also horrifying unseen video from October 7th, showing the barbarity and level of depravity Hamas terrorists operated under. In a special complex rescue operation carried out by IDF soldiers and special forces using precise intelligence, the bodies of Ilan Weiss and Idan Shtifi were located in Gaza. The IDF first confirmed on Friday they identified the body of 56-year-old Weiss, and during the operation they located findings linked to another deceased hostage. Weiss was kidnapped from Kibbutz Be'eri after he went out on that morning of October 7th to help the emergency response team that he was on, and he never returned back home. Meanwhile, Shtivi just arrived to the Nova Music Festival on October 7th when Hamas began their deadly attack. He worked to save several concert goers. Both men were confirmed to be murdered on October 7th, with their bodies then dragged into Gaza. As we said, it has been 695 days since Hamas's horrifying and inhumane attack, killing more than 1,200 Israelis in heinous ways, injuring thousands of others, and leaving mental scars for the innocent. Alongside the family, Netanyahu released video from that horrible morning, which was part of the 45-minute unedited video shown to journalists early on in the war. You're taking a look at it on your screen right now. It was so grotesque the video was not released to the public. But now this released video shows the Tassa family in their home in a moshav just on the northern border in Israel, where Gaza sits, which shows their 46-year-old father, Gil, with his two sons running to their bomb shelter earlier on in this video that was outside their home before a Hamas terrorist threw a grenade inside of it, killing the father. In their underwear, you can see these boys. They were dragged out, brought out by Hamas terrorists. They were then brought into the home, still inside of their underwear with their father's blood on top of them. They went inside screaming for their father. A terrorist then goes inside their kitchen, takes a drink from their fridge. One of the boys is heard saying that he thought they were going to die. They both, in fact, did survive this horrific moment. One of them did lose vision to one of their eyes. Cabinet ministers say the phased hostage release and ceasefire proposal, previously approved by Jerusalem and crafted with U.S. envoy Steve Witkoff, is no longer on the table. We know the prime minister is pushing for a full comprehensive deal to get all hostages out. Instead, Israel is moving forward with their plans for a major military push to capture and control Gaza City. 7 Israeli soldiers were also wounded this weekend when their armored personnel carrier ran over an explosive device in the Zaytun area of central Gaza. And separately, the IDF has announced the death of another soldier, Sergeant First Class Ariel Lubliner, 34 years old, from Kiryat Bialik. He was tragically killed by friendly fire in southern Gaza. Initial reports say he was hit by a bullet accidentally discharged by a fellow soldier. And to the news that we've been following all weekend, Israeli strikes in Yemen targeted Houthi leadership. And we know in Yemen, this major escalation happened. Israeli airstrikes reportedly decimated Houthi leadership in Sana'a, the capital. According to reports, the Houthi prime minister and several cabinet ministers were killed Thursday night as they watched a televised speech by their leader, Abdul Malik al-Houthi. Israel confirmed its targeted sites in Sana'a tied to Houthi governance. An IDF assessment suggests up to 13 senior officials, including the prime minister and dozens of ministers, were killed in that strikes. Some reports say several leaders were killed inside the presidential palace. Notably, their defense minister and chief of staff are believed to have survived that attack, and the full extent of the damage is still unclear at this point in time. Now, the strikes come after the IDF shot down 2 Houthi drones headed for Israel earlier that day on Thursday. And in the words of Israeli Defense Minister Israel Katz, he said, quote, "After the strike of darkness comes the strike on the firstborn. Anyone who raises a hand against Israel, that hand will be severed." A day later, thousands of Houthi supporters came out to the streets of Sana'a for a pro-Palestinian rally. Of course, with all of this news coming out, we want to discuss and break it down for you. Joining us now to discuss it is Major Reserves Elliot Chodoff, a political and military analyst. Thanks so much for being with us.
Always a pleasure.
First, let's talk about this news about this Houthi prime minister and these other several cabinet members that apparently were killed in these strikes. What is the significance of this, and could this really damage the Houthi organization that's backed by Iran?
It certainly damages them. The question is, well, whether it will damage them over the long term, and the answer to that is, in all probability, no. This is one of those situations where Israel must strike. It must strike back at the Houthis for everything they're doing. It certainly has a short-term impact in taking out a number of leaders, but it's really more symbolic than it is practical. And symbolism counts, and don't misunderstand this. That doesn't make it superficial, but it means that unlike the strikes that were used against the Iranian leadership at the beginning of the 12-day campaign and against Hezbollah at the beginning of the campaign that started with the beepers and even before that, this is not a paralytic strike. In other words, the leadership that was taken out is important, but evidenced by the fact that the cabinet is meeting in a secret location shows that it hasn't exactly paralyzed the Houthis. If anything, it makes them more interested in striking specifically at Israeli leadership. It doesn't make the situation worse. It's a message that has to be sent, but its overall strategic value is probably minimal.
I want to ask you, what would then get the Houthis to the point where they would drop everything? Is it even possible for them to get to that point where they wouldn't attack Israel any longer? What would it take?
I don't think anything will convince them. What has to be done is to get them to the point where they're physically incapable of doing it. I think we're facing the same situation with Hamas in Gaza. These are radical jihadi organizations, hardcore ideology, and they're going to continue to fight with whatever they have. The key here is to make sure that they don't have enough to continue the fight. And of course, that's a much more difficult mission, a more complicated mission than convincing an actor, an enemy, that it's not worth it for them to continue. Those who are certainly willing to sacrifice themselves, or as their philosophy, their aspiration is to die as martyrs, can't be convinced in the sense of, okay, we've beaten you up, now it's time for you to quit.
Right. I will say this and note to our viewers that I don't believe there's been any attacks on Israel by the Houthis since these strikes were launched by Israel on Thursday.
Correct.
Of course, we will continue to monitor, but from what we've seen over the weekend, it was a pretty silent weekend for Israelis across the country in terms of no ballistic missile launches or sirens that went off, in addition to any drones that were also detected that, the public, of course, knows about. Let's move over to this expansion inside of Gaza City. We're hearing now that the war, specifically in this city, a Hamas stronghold, is now deemed a combat zone. In your opinion, did this happen relatively fast, or is this in tune with what the timeline that you believed would have taken place?
No, it's certainly part of a timeline. The IDF is clearly mobilizing. The reserve call-ups have gone out. There are reserve units that are meant to appear, the reservists to come to duty this week. An operation this scale doesn't happen overnight. In other words, even if we're looking at an actual maneuver that's days or even a couple of weeks away, it's not done as a sprint. That happens in an emergency, but we're not in a responsive emergency as we were on October 7th, or let's say on Yom Kippur 1973. I think we also have to keep in mind that there are two things going on here simultaneously that are complementary. One is putting pressure on Hamas to come to terms, and that's the preferred option, I think, of the IDF, at least in the short term, for a whole bunch of reasons. And that pressure has to be on the basis of a credible threat that if they don't give in to the pressure, the threat is actually triggered, and that's a full-scale operation in Gaza. So the two are in parallel, they complement, and it's being done in a very loud, if you will, and gradual sort of way to increase that threat and make it clear, either come to terms on our terms, or we're going to go ahead with this.
Right. And I think that, leads me, of course, to my next question about these hostage negotiations. We know that Prime Minister Netanyahu is pushing for a comprehensive deal, a deal that will bring home all 50 hostages that are still, 48 hostages at this point in time that are in captivity. I want to ask you, though, about these rescues that took place just the other day. We know that 2 hostages have been rescued. We mentioned earlier in this broadcast. We don't know actually where they were recovered in Gaza. The details have not come out yet. Can you talk a little bit about, just from the previous rescue operations, what we've learned, and how usually the IDF is able to target and locate where these hostages are? Remember, I'm sure some of these hostages must be buried as well, because these are the ones that are deceased.
Right. Well, first of all, let's be clear. Let's differentiate between hostage rescue operations, of which there have been a few, and the recovering of remains, which certainly important, but not on the same scale and certainly not on the same level of complexity. In other words, the operation itself is obviously complicated, but it's not sensitive on the level of we have to get in there and save people before the terrorists murder them. So it's a different timeline operationally. Where does the information come from? Usually in these sorts of operations, live or remains, they come from a variety of sources. It's a mosaic that's put together, and here you have very, very high grades to the intelligence services who are doing it, but most likely a combination of indicators, interrogation of terrorists who've been captured, cross-referencing information with hostages that have been released, and possibly, and I wouldn't rule this out, information coming from the ground in Gaza. Not every Gazan is a true blue Hamas supporter, and any bit of information coming out, cross-referenced, triangulated, can give the location. Once again, and without denigrating in any way the complexity of this type of operation, let's also keep in mind that finding remains, especially, as you mentioned, if they're buried, means that they're not being moved around. In other words, the location remains static. It can be ascertained. The operation can be planned around that and be brought out. Still very complicated, still very high level, but not the same as trying to rescue a live hostage who could be moved this morning when you plan an operation this evening. So,
right. Go ahead.
Yeah. No, just again, great work by the intelligence people, and of course, highest grades to the people in the field who are doing the job and actually getting it out.
Right. Of course, you mentioned the living hostages there. I think it goes to the point that the government has continued to say that Hamas uses these hostages to keep them in this war, to give them power to continue going on, especially the living ones, right? Because Israel knows
Absolutely.
that every day time matters. Time is up against them to save these people, these 20 hostages that are still believed to be alive at this point in time. I want to talk about this partial deal that's currently on the table that Hamas accepted about 2 weeks ago. Do you think that the military expansion and pressure by Israel led Hamas to come back to the table? And if so, Israel's at this point where they're going to go forward with Gaza City. But what do they do about a deal? Are deals and negotiations happening in the background?
It's certainly happening in the background, and I have a basic rule of thumb that we should also keep in mind that while all of this is going on, all public statements should be taken with a grain of salt. They have their own purposes. That doesn't mean they're necessarily wrong, but it doesn't mean they're necessarily right either. There's certainly background context. The military pressure is part of the picture. Hamas certainly doesn't feel it's in the same position of confidence that it was months ago when it rejected the deal. But there's other pressure going on as well. There's American pressure on the Qataris and the Egyptians who are putting pressure on Hamas. All sorts of other elements going on at the same time. The taking out of leadership. It's gradual. It's sort of one at a time at this point. Most of the Hamas leadership in Gaza has been eliminated, but those who are left know that they have targets on them, and their time is limited. So once again, a whole complex of considerations as far as they're concerned. I think it's also important for us to keep in mind, and my personal opinion, but not just mine, I don't think Hamas is ever going to release all of the hostages. We've already seen the announcement on their part that they don't know where all of them are. That's a hint. Even if they agree to all, they're going to turn around and say, well, we would give them all back to you, but we don't know where 3, 4, or 5 of them are. And that leaves the let's say the differential between a partial deal for 10 and a full deal for, I'm making up a number now, 15, 16, or 17.
Sure.
That's the variable. And now the question is, under what circumstances, what does Israel have to pay for it? And what will Israel have to pay for it in the future in order to get the deal?
Yeah, I was speaking with someone actually earlier today who's connected to the families of hostages. And she, we discussed how these recovery operations to get these deceased hostages out actually helps at the end of the day, because there's no prisoners coming out in exchange for them if a deal were to actually happen.
Exactly.
So these 2 hostages that were recovered and brought back to Israel for proper burial were brought back, and there's nothing that will be in exchange for them because there's
Correct.
another side of these families who they worry so much the future of the security of the state of Israel. You have the Hostages Family Forum, and then you have this other movement who believes
Yes.
that, they worry about what could happen if prisoners are released because the history and the scar of Yahya Sinwar still sits on the Israeli people today. Though in terms of a partial deal, is it possible Hamas could back out at some point? What do you foresee happening here?
Let's let's keep in mind that Hamas has not agreed to a deal. Hamas has agreed to a framework to begin to discuss a deal. Mm-hmm. They are master negotiators. They've done this before. We're almost there. We've just got two more things to work out, and they'll walk away. So I think even the optimism here is overstated. It's certainly a move in the right direction that they have agreed to it, but to say that they have agreed to a deal and Israel is the one that's stopping it because it hasn't agreed to a deal is actually a misframe of the situation. Mm. They've agreed to discuss the deal. And we're still a long way, even if Israel now goes forward with it, we're still a long way from coming to a conclusion and saying, okay, we're all signed off on the bottom line.
Mm-hmm. Elliot, Chodoff, thanks so much for being with us. As always, appreciate your perspective.
My pleasure.
And the Trump administration is barring top Palestinian officials from attending the United Nations General Assembly. The State Department says the move underscores America's refusal to reward terrorism. The United States is taking unprecedented action against the Palestinian Authority and the Palestine Liberation Organization, also known as the PLO. On Friday, Secretary of State Marco Rubio announced he is denying and revoking visas for senior PA and PLO officials ahead of the United Nations General Assembly to discuss Palestinian statehood. Now, the decision, according to the State Department, is grounded in U.S. law and national security interests. Spokesperson Tommy Pigot explained on X that, quote, before they can be taken seriously as partners for peace, the PA and PLO must completely reject terrorism and stop counterproductively pursuing the unilateral recognition of a hypothetical state. Now, the move prevents Palestinian leaders, including President Mahmoud Abbas, from using the UN stage to seek unilateral recognition of statehood for the Palestinian people. And joining us now to discuss all of this is former Israeli Ambassador Dani Ayalon. Thanks so much for being with us to discuss this.
My pleasure, Shul.
First, I want to speak about this decision by the U.S. State Department. Were you surprised by it, this announcement? Were you taken back by it? And is this a smart move?
Well, quite frankly, I did not anticipate that. I don't think anyone anticipated it, although on the merit, it is very much justified because the Palestinian Authority continues to support terrorism, either through assisting and financing families of terrorists, because they did not change their law, whereby terrorists can get benefits for the entire life they do. And not only that, there is a tariff. The more Jews they kill, they get more benefits. So this is something that maybe should have been enacted long ago, but people were just almost getting used to it by the Palestinians. There's another issue, of course, where the Palestinians ceaselessly are delegitimizing Israel, whether it's in the tribunal in Hague, whether it's in the General Assembly of the UN, any other of the UN agencies, whether it's UNESCO or UNIFIL or anything else. So this is something which I would say they should have, they had it coming. But on the other hand, I think that there is another reason, a political reason for the US to do it, and this is pretty much to defy the unilateral action of the Europeans, especially President Macron of France, announcing that he's going to recognize a Palestinian state in the United Nations during the General Assembly. So by preventing the Palestinian delegation, of course, headed first and foremost Abu Mazen, they're trying to preempt that so not to lose the grip over the leadership of any political process that would come. And also, they always had, and we do have, a very strong argument against it, because if you give away Palestinian statehood without anything in return, why would the Palestinians have any incentive in the future to discuss anything with Israel? And there are so many things that they must give away, not just the terrorism, but also changing the curriculum and the incitement that they schools, also recognition of Israel as a Jewish state, security issues. All these things have been thrown away by the Europeans and by Macron, and the Americans are putting them back on the table, and rightly so.
So you believe it's a political maneuver, instead of just making this decision, there's a lot of back end things that went into this one thing. What message, though, is the United States trying to send to European leaders like Macron? Is it this Palestinian statehood option is completely off the table? If so, we need to speak about alternatives of what to do with something like the Gaza Strip.
Right. First of all, legally, there cannot be a Palestinian state without endorsement and vote in the Security Council of the UN, where the United States has a veto power. So everything that has been done is mostly for public relations or positioning. We know Macron has a lot of constituencies which are Muslims, so maybe it is not surprising that he's doing that and thinking like a small politician and not like a statesman. But from the United States point of view, if they will give the Europeans any kind of leeway, they will take over. And the United States wants to keep. It's an interest. It's a very important political interest, a foreign policy interest of the United States to keep leadership of the situation. They have consistently blocked any European involvement or UN involvement in the process. So this is very much within, I would say, the long-term policy and interest of the United States.
So it seems as if, though, tell me how realistic this is. If the PA and the PLO actually condemn terrorism, stand up, condemn Hamas, condemn any other type of terrorism and say, here on out, this is what we're going to be doing. Is that even possible? What could eventually change the decision to get these officials to the United Nations?
Yeah, well, condemning Hamas or condemning the horrific murder or massacre of the 7th of October is only a first step. The most important thing is, what do? Do they stop or withhold any financing of terrorists? Will they enact in Judea and Samaria, in Territory A, which they totally control, would they fight terrorism in a meaningful way? So far, they have not. The only reason we do not see an outbreak of terrorism in Judea and Samaria is because of the presence of Israel and the IDF there. So there is a long way for them to really prove that they are ready for peace, and they are no way near.
Donnie, Ayalon, thanks so much for being with us as always. Appreciate your time.
My pleasure.
And in another blow to regional relations, Turkey has announced it is severing all economic ties with Israel. While it's not yet confirmed whether Turkish airspace is going to be closed to Israeli flights, one Turkish diplomatic source actually claims the ban applies only to government or weapons-related flights, with commercial traffic expected to continue. Now, earlier this year, Turkey halted $7 billion in annual trade with Israel in protest of the war, and now port authorities are reportedly refusing to accept vessels bound to or from Israel. And the latest move may also restrict air traffic through Turkish airspace. Now, the Turkish foreign minister said, quote, "We have closed off our ports to Israeli ships. We are not allowing Turkish vessels to go into Israel. No other country has totally cut its trade with Israel. We are not allowing weapons or ammunition to be transported by sea or by air." That's a direct quote from Turkey's foreign minister. And in a historic diplomatic shift, the United Nations Security Council has voted to renew UNIFIL in Lebanon for just one more year, signaling an end to the mission after 48 years. Israel welcomed the decision, calling it a long overdue recognition of what they say is a failure to stop Hezbollah from turning southern Lebanon into a military stronghold. And that is a wrap here on ILTV on the Hour. Thanks so much for being with us as always and following our live updates as they continue to come out in real time. Thanks so much and see you soon.